Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room. In this video, I'm going to be talking about infatuation. This was actually a suggestion from a person who's been following my channel for a while now, whose username I believe is Rolam3, if I'm correct. Hi. Fellow Irish-French person, hope you're well. I thought that the suggestion was an interesting one. It was a suggestion about making a video about infatuation, presumably in relation to the condition or the experience of being an INFJ. I'm not sure that's outside of my experience as an INFJ man. I'd be like necessarily the most qualified to talk about infatuation, even from like a philosophical point of view. You know, philosophy is a domain that I like and that I feel comfortable in to an extent. And the question of love, the nature of love, what is love, is a big question for philosophers. You see it very famously discussed in the Symposium by Plato, one of the most famous, I would say one of the most famous philosophical works of all time. Dialogue on the nature of love, the concept of platonic love. You know, when you say, well, our relationship, we love each other, but it's purely platonic. That comes from Plato's Symposium. It's obviously a slightly reinterpreted, bastardized, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but Plato didn't really mean platonic love in the way in which it is understood these days, but still he discussed the essence of that, and he does in the dialogue distinguish it from infatuation, which is different from love. Now, I don't want this video to be about Plato's concept of love and infatuation. I'm sure I could make some videos on Plato in the future, some more videos on Plato in the future, because he is, after all, a fellow INFJ. But infatuation in the experience, in the life experience of an INFJ, it's a big topic. It's a big topic because I feel like if I look at my life now from the perspective of like 31 years of existence, and I guess more than half of it spent post-puberty, I have been very few times. I have been in love very few times. Or rather, I should say, I've loved someone very few times. Because I would distinguish between being in love and loving. I'll come back to that. So I've loved very few times. Perhaps only once. That is now, in the current relationship I'm in. So I've loved perhaps only once. By comparison, I've been infatuated many times. Infatuated, I don't want to say too many times, but I went through a phase, let's say ever since I was 16, like for 10 years or something, like the few years before I went to Ireland, and in Ireland, just a lot, you know. And I don't think that in any of those instances love was involved. And so, you know, what does that say about the difference, you know, and what does it say about the nature of infatuation itself, about having thoughts, about projecting, about idealizing, about putting on a pedestal? Well, um, I guess, like, from my experience, I would say, I would say in order to love, you sort of have to be ready yourself for it. You don't need to be ready for infatuation. Infatuation is easier than love, of course, because I think that there's an element of selflessness in love that can be absent in infatuation. I don't necessarily think that, infatuation has to be selfish, but I think that you can be infatuated with someone regardless of whether or not you have a certain form of selflessness towards the well-being of the other person. And in this sense, there is a potential for selfishness in infatuation, which I think is an indication of the fact that you're not in love, really. Even though when you're at the height of infatuation, imagine that you're having a lot of obsessive thoughts, which happens a lot in these cases. You are feeling things physiologically very strongly. Sometimes you can just have trouble sleeping. You can, like, your heart can start racing if you see the other person from a distance walking towards you, say like on a university campus or something. Despite all these signs, these are not signs that you're necessarily in love, in my opinion. Or that if you are in love, that being in love is only a higher form of infatuation rather than loving someone. And I think that I will use an example from my life to illustrate how I got to understand the difference. I mean, I understood that difference in theory, partly from reading Plato, but of course theory is never really enough to understand something until one has experienced it in real life and someone has come to terms with it and made sense of it. There needs to be a sort of something tangible about the experience before it can be properly understood, I think. When it's more than just like an abstract concept, which of course love is, and infatuation is same. It's another concept, but it's still an abstract. It's not an abstract concept. It's palpable. It has a body in a sense. Well, I remember, a few years ago, like I think it was in 2016. I went through a phase of like being very infatuated with someone that I had met on Tinder, of all places. I had been 2016 was the only year in which I tried Tinder. I guess I just wanted to try it out, and things didn't really work out so well, but I just met this person, and with that person things seemed to click, and we had things in common, and we were getting on during the first few dates, and I became infatuated with that person. With it came a certain form of weakening, also a form of worry about when that person was not texting too quickly, or that's a lot of self-questioning. And I think if I want to tie it with being an INFJ, I don't know if this is something that happens with all INFJs, but I guess like being a feeler, I just felt these things very strongly, and I was maybe too attentive to different possible signs that were indicating this or that, which led to my over-interpreting a lot of stuff. And usually if you start to display this overthinking, even when you don't think that you're displaying it to the other person, you're still displaying it. The other person can see it, especially if they are not overthinking themselves. And so the other person becomes more distant, and this is like this infernal vicious cycle, like you think that you end up thinking whenever you become infatuated with someone, whenever you show feeling, the other person goes away. There's a truth to that, I think, is that it's not necessarily attractive. That's how it is to show interest too quickly to another person. And in a lot of cases, except in situations when there's like love at first sight, which I believe in. I mean, in the sense of like infatuation at first sight, with the potential to turn into love, which happens, and I guess happened in the case of my current girlfriend. Well, it certainly did not happen like this. It happened in my mind, in my projecting mind at the time with this person in 2016. The mechanics of it, really interesting. I don't know. I think that part of me was feeling kind of existentially empty. There was a desire for me. I had this desire to fall in love, because I projected it as sort of instilling some kind of new meaning into my life, which seemed to be at kind of a standstill at many levels. And it's almost like my mind decided that, you know, this person would be like the solution to a lot of my own issues, that I would really have to, I had to work on myself. But I started seeing this person as the personification of like a solution to many things. And I think that even when that was not expressed in words, she felt it, and she felt it as a form of pressure. Not to mention that in hindsight, I don't think that that person was actually even compatible with me. But what's really interesting, to come back to what my mum said, that made me realize something about the difference between infatuation and love, is that at some point she was not giving me news for days, which any person who has been like infatuated with or in love with a person who was not really reciprocating has experienced this feeling of like having to wait forever before getting a text message back. And it was really painful. It was really painful. And I was like, oh my God, like what's happening? Why is she not, you know, conforming to this? Why does she not reciprocate? You know, why does she not give me all the attention that I want? And so that happens for a few days, and I had my mum on the phone at some points, and I mentioned it to her. Sometimes, you know, I talk to my mum. Well, it hasn't happened in a few years, but I would talk to my mum from time to time for advice, or just sharing my experience. As a psychologist, let's say, my mum is, in some respects, better than my dad. My dad, you know, he's very extroverted, and sometimes it's not easy for him to put himself in my shoes, but that's beside the point. So I called her and I was like, I have not gotten any news from her, and I don't feel good. I kind of feel like, you know, I want to hear from her, you know. And what she said was, are you sure you're in love with her? And I said, well, I don't know if I'm in love, but I feel something strong. And she said to me something that I will never forget. She said, if you were in love with her, if you loved her, sure, you'd be worried. But you would not be worried about the facts. You would not be looking at it from this perspective of your own self. You'd be worried about maybe something having happened to her. And it's true that it wasn't at all what I was thinking. What I was thinking was, I'm worried because she has not validated my expectation for being given a sign that, you know, she's thinking about me or whatever. And I mean, of course, like, I love it when my girlfriend tells me that she's thinking about me, that she misses me. But I think that I'd be more worried if she were not to give news for a while. I'd be worried. And I'm speaking about Maria, my current girlfriend. I'd be worried that something happened to her. That would be my first worry. I would be thinking about her well-being first. I would not be thinking, oh, she's not been in touch, maybe she doesn't like me anymore. My first reaction would be to be worried about her. And I think that's love. Whereas if you think about yourself first, I think that's infatuation. It hasn't turned into love. And that's the selflessness of love, I think. When you love someone, you cannot be happy without them being happy, right? And I think that in infatuation, the focus is on the self. In love, I think the focus is not on the other person necessarily, because it would be an idealization of love itself. But I think the focus is on the two people together as a unit, kind of imbricated with one another. So the one person does not really like make sense without the other person as part of their world. It's the sharing of a world. Philosopher Alain Badiou, who has written very theoretical works that even I have, difficulty understanding. He also wrote some very interesting little books on love that are full of beautiful insights. So I recommend them for those who are interested. And he says, being in love, or rather loving, is sharing a world, and I think that's it. It's like your vision. It's like you see things no longer from your own perspective, like in infatuation. And the other person, same. You kind of see it through a shared perspective, like you're sharing eyesight and you're looking at things and you're hearing things from that shared perspective, as if you're just a united being. And it's true that if I try to think about all the times that I've been infatuated with this person in 2016, but like prior to that, I'd been infatuated way more, even when I was younger. And there's a link between also, like, I think there's a link between sincerely loving and loving oneself. I'm not sure that if you do not have enough, and I'm not implying by any means that being infatuated with someone means that the person does not love themselves. But I do think that in order to love, one needs to love themselves at least a bit. Because if you don't love yourself, you're going to be looking for the confirmation that you deserve love. And that's infatuation. Whereas if you love yourself at least a bit, you are going to be capable of sharing that love of yourself with the other person, and that other person will share their love of themselves with you, so that it's the uniting of being in love can take place. In order to have a relationship that is cemented by love, there needs to be love coming from both sides, but there needs to be self-love to start with, so that the two selves can merge in a sense. So I think that there is some kind of connection between always being stuck in infatuation and sort of lacking in self-love. And that certainly was my case for many, many years. Self-acceptance, self-love has been a big key to my, no longer being infatuated easily with people who didn't deserve really to be the object of my attention, towards being capable of loving and loving the right person. So yeah, that's my perspective. That was a bit rambly as usual with these episodes, so I hope that was still understandable, and I would be very curious to know what you guys think about infatuation and about love and about being in love. Do you think there are differences? Do you think they are more or less the same? What distinguishes them, and what is your story with them? I have not really tied it to INFJ personally. Maybe in the future, if I see how to link it conceptually with the INFJ type, I will. But for this particular episode, I wanted to draw from personal experience mostly. But yeah, I still hope it was good. Talk to you soon, guys. Have a lovely day. It's really sunny here. I hope it is sunny where you are. See ya.